Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the latest federal policy developments on child, youth, and family homelessness. We're happy to have you all here. So just a little bit about us, your wonderful presenters for the day. My name is Alian Anderson, and I am the Policy and Outreach Associate for Schoolhouse Connection, and I will allow Darla and Barbara to introduce themselves.
My name is Barbara Duffield. I am the Executive Director of Schoolhouse Connection.
And my name is Darla Bardine, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Network for Youth.
And just a little bit before we dive into everything, we're going to go through the agenda soon, but so everyone knows, in case you have questions throughout the presentation, please add them to the Q&A panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. You'll see the question and answer section, and we'll be sure to get to your questions as they come, and we'll also have a dedicated Q&A section towards the end. But other than that, we have a great lineup for you all today. So we're going to discuss what's hot on the Hill. We're going to also discuss fiscal year 2022 and 2023 federal policy budgets, the Build Back Better Act, the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking and Prevention Act, and other top legislative priorities concerning children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. Then we're going to take a look at what's heating up in 2022 and also priorities for the Biden administration. So, whoops. Okay. So what is hot on the Hill or not? So the federal budget for fiscal year 2022, the House and Senate, as always, or majority of the times, they proposed two different numbers for funding levels for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program and the Runaway and Homeless Youth program, Homeless Youth Act program. So the House proposed an increase for EHCY of $116.6 million. And for RHYA, it proposed 149.7 million. But in contrast to this, the Senate proposed $146.5 million, which is a 38% increase from the fiscal year 2021 allocation for EHCY, which was $106.5 million. So this was an increase of $40 million. And for RHYA, the Senate proposed $149.9 million. So that's $200,000 more than the House proposal, and in all, this would be a 9.7% increase from the previous year allocation for RHYA, which was $136 million. So I'm sure everyone here can guess which of these two numbers we'd like to get past. But despite this, these numbers aren't final as yet, and it's because there's been quite a bit of intra-party and partisan disagreements in both chambers of Congress. And another thing that happened is that last week, Thursday, on December 2nd, the Senate passed what's called a continuing resolution, which is basically a stopgap measure that the government proposes whenever they're reaching the deadline for a previous fiscal year and they haven't settled on numbers, they haven't made an agreement, and they do this to avoid a government shutdown. So this continuing resolution was passed right before the deadline, right before the clock struck 12, more or less, on December 2nd. The previous deadline was December 3rd, and this stopgap measure will continue until February 18th, 2022. So what this means is that all federal programs have their funding frozen at the same levels that they were at for fiscal year 2021 until Congress can decide on new numbers. So if you're wondering a little bit more about what the other federal programs concerning homeless children and youth, their funding levels are looking like, we have a little snippet of this funding chart showing funding levels going back all the way to fiscal year 2017 and also the proposed numbers for this year. And we also have a full chart with even more programs on the Schoolhouse Connection website, www.schoolhouseconnection.org. So if you're curious and you want to know a little bit more, I urge you to check that out as well. If you're also wondering what you can do to help to ensure that the higher numbers are included in the final bills, and don't worry thinking that it's a little too far away, because we will send out reminders as well. So this is another reason, and this is a plug for our newsletter that I also encourage you all to sign up for. Once again, you can sign up for it on www.schoolhouseconnection.org. We urge you to urge your U.S. representatives and senators to fund EHCY at $146.5 million and RHYA at $149.9 million. So the Senate numbers. And to do this, you might be wondering, how do I get in contact with them? What do I say? Well, you're in luck, because we actually have this easy online form here that you can personalize, or you can use the template as is and send this to your congressional delegation. All you have to do is type in bit.ly/EHCY-RHYA. Or once this presentation is available to you, all these links will be embedded in the presentation. So you can feel free to go there as well once you get this. And I just saw someone ask if we can put this in the link, put this in the chat, and I will also be sure to put the link in the chat box for everyone. And with that, I'll pass it to Darla.
Thank you. So two other requests that we have for fiscal year 2022 appropriations. One is to continue funding for the HUD Youth Homeless Demonstration Program. And specifically, our request is $100 million for funding, with only a few million going to training and technical assistance, not the usual 10 million plus that they get awarded. And then we also would like report language included within the bill, one that requires youth advisory boards and runaway and homeless youth providers to actually sign off and approve the COC plan that's submitted. Also requiring budgets to allocate actual money to pay for the creation and ongoing maintenance of youth action boards, and report language that would require all categories of homeless youth to be served. So that would include those young people who are considered homeless under the McKinney-Vento education definition, as well as the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act definition. And then our other request is $3.5 billion for McKinney-Vento HUD Homeless Assistance Grant Program, along with report language that would just make it easier for youth and families to access HUD homelessness assistance. So things around eligibility criteria, definitions, prioritization, and to remove any type of specific eligibility for transitional housing and permanent supportive housing. And we also have a report language request that would prohibit discrimination across all programs. And I think I'm handing it over to Barbara now.
Okay, so we're going to go back in time in order to go to the future. Just want to say that we do have this unprecedented opportunity with the American Rescue Plan, Homeless Children and Youth Funding. And just by way of recap, this is the $800 million that Congress allocated specifically for the identification, enrollment, and wraparound services for children and youth experiencing homelessness. This was a tremendous advocacy effort. Involved youth providers, family providers, liaisons across the country. We really were able to show the need by showing that the previous COVID package, the ESSER dollars, the K-12 federal education dollars, were not reaching children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. Only 18% of liaisons who responded to our survey about the larger federal package said those dollars were getting to children and youth who are homeless. So we have now ARP-HCYA with a hyphen. It is 8 times the annual appropriation, and it's 10 times. If you take in one allocation, it's more than 10 times or more than the previous 10 years combined. But the thing about ARP-HCY is that it does not need to be one-time funding. This is really actually, it is just over 1% of the K-12 federal education budget. So it's, in the scheme of things, not a lot of money, but it is a tremendous potential to change systems, to change lives, including because it's more flexible use and because of the way it can be used with community-based organizations. So next slide, please. Our advocacy moving forward around funding for the education of homeless children and youth for fiscal year 2023 is making ARP-HCYA. There should be a hyphen. We learned that yesterday, so it's not consistent in all of our slides, but the Department of Ed is using a hyphen. It should be the new normal. So our advocacy moving forward, not for fiscal year 2022, because that's wrapping up as was just explained, but for moving forward is the new normal. So how can you help now if you are a school district liaison, or if you are a Runaway and Homeless Youth Act provider or youth provider who's partnering with the school district liaison? We will have data, the department will do an evaluation, but we need information in real time as we look towards FY23. So that means keeping both the hard data, the increases in student outcomes, how many more students were identified, the increase in the number of school districts who are participating, the examples of the relationships that we're building with community-based organizations, but also some of the stories of the children and youth who are assisted. So for example, one I got today about a young man, unaccompanied homeless youth, did not have his auto insurance for the month. He was driving himself to school. Because of the flexibility of this funding, the school district was able to help with the auto insurance. He was able to get to school. He's graduating in December. So those sorts of examples that make this seem much more real to policymakers. So if you are a recipient of these funds, just be thinking in the back of your minds, how can you, keep track, keep those stories. We're seeing a lot of local media stories and local papers about the funds, districts that are getting funds for the first time, or districts who are getting many more funds than their much higher funding level than they're used to. And those make for great local press. When that's in the local paper, we then can take those stories to members of Congress and say, look what's happening. This is actually having an impact right now. So if you're interested in being part of this effort to make ARP HCY, with not that name, it'll come up with a better name, but to make the funding level and the flexibility and the uses of funds the new normal, please let us know. We'll have information coming up in a couple of slides. All right, so now we're going to switch to the Build Back Better Act and go through some of the provisions. This is in the news a lot, and sometimes it's called Biden's social spending plan or safety net plan, but it's the Build Back Better Act, and this is the second big budget reconciliation, but maybe the third this year, that has many, many categories of assistance in housing, early care, higher ed. We're going to focus on the provisions that are the most directly related to child, youth, and family homelessness. It was passed in the House in November. So what we're going to go over is what was in the House bill, but just to say that we do know that there will be changes on the Senate side that are being negotiated now, both for political reasons and also for some very wonky procedural reasons related to budgets in the Senate. So first big piece is childcare. What do the childcare provisions mean for children, youth, and families who are experiencing homelessness? Build Back Better establishes a birth through 5 childcare entitlement program. And this is direct childcare services for low and lower income children who are under age 6 and not yet enrolled in kindergarten. Some important pieces specific to homelessness: uses the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. So children who meet that definition, children in foster care or kinship care, are categorically eligible. That means if their families meet those income thresholds, which they pretty much would, their parents would not be subject to the work or the education or the job training requirements that is typically required of childcare and would be required for other families who are participating in this. So that's very, very significant, because it's very hard to work if you are experiencing homelessness. Some of those training requirements right away exclude families who are experiencing homelessness. Also, in terms of the co-pays, families with less than 75% of the state median income would not pay any co-payments for childcare. This too is important, because under the current rules, families who are experiencing homelessness are prioritized. They are eligible in many states for childcare, but the cost of childcare still puts it out of reach. That co-payment is still too much for a family experiencing homelessness. So you can see the gradations there. I won't read the full bullet about how co-payments go up, but for most of our families experiencing homelessness, foster families, there would not be any co-payment. And there are other pieces in the child care provisions of Build Back Better that require states to prioritize access and increase the supply for children who are in underserved populations, and specifically calls out children who are homeless, children in foster care. Next slide. We're now looking at the preschool provisions in Build Back Better. And here too, we have some pretty exciting news in the bill as it currently stands. So this sets up a 6-year universal preschool program, and it's mixed delivery, which means it can be childcare programs, local educational agencies, or Head Start programs. It would be administered at the federal level by the Department of Health and Human Services in coordination with the Department of Ed. And then there's some pieces here that, again, I'm not going to read every bullet to you, about policies and practices for outreach and expedited enrollment for children who are homeless in foster care, if an LEA is a grantee, then McKinney-Vento applies, so it's immediate enrollment. The piece that we're the most excited about here is we know that one of the #1 barriers to accessing preschool is transportation. And this legislation, it's not really universal if you have no way of getting there. So the legislation would require states to ensure age-appropriate transportation services are provided at a minimum for children who are experiencing homelessness and children in foster care. So that's really a big piece of this, and one that we are advocating for to stay in the final version. Next slide, please.
Okay. So if you're wondering what's also in the Build Back Better Act in terms of housing, so the Build Back Better Act, as it stands, it has $25 billion set aside for rental assistance. And of this funding, there is an additional set aside of $7.2 billion specifically for individuals and families who are experiencing or are at risk of homelessness. And if you aren't too familiar with the HUD or housing definition of homelessness and at risk of homelessness, when at risk of homelessness is used, this refers to persons who are in doubled up situations or who may be staying in hotels or motels. And generally those who classify under the education definition of homelessness are categorized as being at risk of homelessness under the housing definition. This also extends to survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, and human trafficking. There's an additional $300 million provided for competitive grants for mobility-related services, which would allow low-income families to move to high-opportunity areas, and $230 million provided for landlord incentives to participate in this program as well, in the rental assistance program. There's also $65 billion provided for public housing, $15 billion for the National Housing Trust Fund to support preservation of homes and also creation of new rental homes for low-income households, and $1 billion invested in Native American communities and housing in Native American communities. So the Earned Income Tax Credit. This is actually a provision that was originally included in the American Rescue Plan that lowered the age that youth who were previously in foster care and youth who are experiencing homelessness can claim the Earned Income Tax Credit. So it lowered the age for 1 year to 18, and for persons who were previously in foster care and for youth who were experiencing homelessness, and for all young adults to the age 19. So what this does is it allows foster and homeless youth to claim the Earned Income Tax Credit even if they are full-time students and working, because current law prohibits full-time students from claiming EITC and living in eligible housing. Oh, I'm sorry, actually, scratch that. It allows them to claim the EITC if they're full-time students and working, because yeah, current law prohibits that. It also increases for 1 year the maximum credit for a childless claimant in 2021 to $1,502. And the Build Back Better Act would extend this provision from the American Rescue Plan Act for 1 additional year. So these provisions will be extended to 2022 as well. Another provision that was also included in the American Rescue Plan Act is that of the Child Tax Credit. So in the American Rescue Plan Act, the Child Tax Credit allowed advance payments for families and households, and the amounts that families could receive for their children were increased to $3,600 for children under the age of 6 years old, and $3,000 for children between age 6 and 17 years of age. So once again, the Build Back Better Act extends this for 1 additional year, in addition to the 1 year that the American Rescue Plan Act made this allowable. So this will also be extended until 2022. And I will pass it to Darla.
Awesome, thank you. Now we're going to talk about youth employment. Next slide, please. There's lots of good things in Build Back Better when you're looking at youth employment. As you know, a lot of young people lost employment due to COVID. So specifically what's in there is $1.5 billion for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, youth employment and training activities. There's also $1 billion for registered apprenticeship programs, youth apprenticeship programs, and pre-apprenticeship programs. And there's $465 million for the Youth Build program, $450 million for Job Corps, and then this $350 million along with the $1 billion for the different apprenticeship programs. That's new funding streams. They're not existing authorized youth employment programs. So they definitely are new opportunities. But that $350 million is basically paid youth employment programs. So community-based organizations, different organizations on the ground can apply for funding directly to the Department of Labor to partner with, employers to actually pay young people to engage in a youth employment program where young people build skills, learn how to develop a resume, interview for jobs, and participate in the program. And all the while they're participating, even before they secure employment, they are paid for their time. And just a note, a common thread throughout the language in Build Back Better is an emphasis on jobs that are green or jobs that are in the environmental space. So clean energy, other jobs that are seen as pro-environmental. And that's true for Youth Build, Job Corps, WIOA, apprenticeship programs, as well as the paid youth employment opportunities. Next slide, please. So now we're going to shift to what is heating up in 2022. Next slide. So, we are expecting the vote on Build Back Better to happen probably early in the new year. And there's some additional top legislative priorities that we have as it relates to homeless children, youth, and families. So one of our priorities is around removing barriers to higher education for homeless and foster youth, which Barbara's going to talk about next. And then also getting the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking Prevention Act introduced and passed, which I will talk about afterwards. I'll hand it over to Barbara now.
Great, thank you. So this is another looking back to look forward piece. We had a great victory last December, about a year ago, when the Congress passed the FAFSA Simplification Act. So this was more than a decade of advocacy that finally got to the finish line. And what it does is remove some very significant barriers that youth who are experiencing homelessness and youth from foster care face when they are applying for federal aid to go to college. You can see this slide here lists some of the things that it does, but and having to prove your unaccompanied homeless status every year, that will be no longer there. There are more entities that can make a determination that a youth is an unaccompanied homeless youth, so they can go, they can have more supports who are providing that information. And then it puts some of the things that are in the guidance for financial aid administrators actually into the law. So for example, financial aid administrators would be required to make determinations for unaccompanied homeless youth who can't get the documentation from third parties. That's in guidance right now. This will make it actually in the law. And other pieces in this as well, and you can see the link there. So this piece, this FAFSA simplification piece, was a big part of our overall higher education priorities. We do, though, have to wait. It doesn't go into effect until 2023, 2024 for that particular FAFSA. But there were other pieces of our higher education federal advocacy that did not get passed, and those are what we're going to talk about next on the next slide. So the legislation that had all of our dream bill, as we call it, all of our many of our recommendations for higher education reform for homeless and foster youth is the Higher Education Access and Success for Homeless and Foster Youth. And for those of you who've been in the field for a while, you've probably seen this has been introduced numerous times. We're planning it will be reintroduced again shortly. It's bipartisan, which is wonderful. And it goes beyond financial aid. So it would require the designation of a higher education liaison, and similar, kind of the counterpart to the K-12 liaison, require plans for housing during breaks and during the semester, would have provisions that would require the TRIO and the Gear Up the Access programs to do specific outreach and identification for homeless youth and foster youth, in-state tuition, prioritizing for work study, numerous other pieces that are really, really important, not just to getting financial aid to go to college, but also to be able to stay in college, to succeed in college, to be supported in college, again, because we know that most jobs that are paying livable wages require some form of post-secondary education. So it's really critical that we keep our lens not just on graduating from high school, but also some form of post-secondary education. So this legislation we expect to be passed, or we expect to be introduced, reintroduced shortly. And on the next slide, you will see what our ask is when this is reintroduced, and this will be Senator Murray from Washington State and Senator Portman from Ohio, when it is reintroduced, and in the House, it'll be Representative Clark and Representative Young, we really need co-sponsors. This is where the more co-sponsors who are on the bill, the more likely it is to move forward, because it shows the committees that there's a lot of support. So when you get the email announcement from the National Network for Youth and from Schoolhouse Connection saying HB has been reintroduced, and the call to action to ask your member to co-sponsor, please do. And again, it's bipartisan, so we're excited about that piece as well. And the next is back to Darla.
All right, thank you, Barbara. So now I'm going to talk about the Runaway and Homeless Youth Trafficking Prevention Act. And this is legislation to reauthorize the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program that's administered at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and in particular within the Family and Youth Services Bureau. This is the only federal program that provides funding directly to communities to provide housing and services for minors and young adults experiencing homelessness. It's been around since the 70s, and it's been improved and expanded over the years, and we are working to really get this legislation passed because it would make some key improvements and expansions to the program. So the bill hasn't been introduced yet, but it is currently being negotiated among our champions in the Senate and the House, which you'll see on this slide. It is bipartisan, bicameral. So we have Senators Leahy and Collins, and then we have Representatives Yarmouth and Bacon. We have, so something that's new from previous versions of the bill is we have asked for a new optional prevention services program. So if I'm a service provider and I'm applying for a basic center program, which provides short-term housing and supportive services for minors experiencing homelessness, I could also apply for an additional $75,000 a year to provide prevention services who aren't currently housed by that program. Right, and it's the purpose is really to prevent young people from running away or experiencing homelessness. And the same would be true for transitional living programs or maternity group homes. Transitional living programs is longer term housing for minors and young adults, and maternity group homes is longer term housing for pregnant and parenting youth. Oh, can you go back to the last slide, please? So some of the other updates that RHY-TPA would make is that if you receive a grant, it would be for 5 years, and there would be new grant opportunities staggered about every 2 to 3 years. Geographic distribution would need to be considered when issuing grants. This is to make sure that funding goes to rural areas as well as urban and suburban. Also would require all grantees to have provide training to staff on human trafficking, trauma, sexual abuse, and assault. And there would be a very comprehensive mandatory non-discriminatory clause added to the legislation as well. Next slide, please. Some other key updates is that the amount of funding per grant award would increase based on how much money Congress appropriated to the program. So if the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act was funded at less than $200 million a year, like it is now, grant awards would be capped at $225,000 to $250,000 per year. Once Congress made the great decision to fund this program at over $200 million per fiscal year, then the grant awards would go up to $250,000 to $275,000 per year. Also, currently the program is authorized at $153 million a year. And so this would be increased significantly to $367.5 million a year. And we put the breakdown there, by how much per program. But basically, a tripling of the street outreach program, significant increase for basic center TLP, and then there would be the additional authorized amount for the new prevention program for $67.5 million. And then we did also add language in there that there should be 2 million every 3 years for a national prevalence study. Sorry, you can go to the next slide now. So this is where we are. This is the pathway for the bill. So the bill will be referred to the House Education and Labor Committee. hopefully the committee takes it up, moves it through a vote, and then it passes through the full House floor. And then in the Senate, it goes through the Senate Judiciary Committee. And so we need the same process. We need the chair of the committee to bring the bill for a vote within committee, move it out, and then we need it to pass through the full Senate. We need identical legislation to pass both chambers before the president signs it. So our ask is that once the bill is introduced, you will get an email from us. Yay, many celebrations. And then to please reach out to your delegation, your House representative, both of your senators, and ask them to co-sponsor this critical legislation. So make sure you're signed up for our newsletter. And I think, am I passing it back? Oh no. So some other of our federal priorities as it relates to homeless children, youth, and families. So the first one is the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. Right now, if you are a full-time student, you are not allowed to live in housing that is affordable housing that's built with a low-income housing tax credit. So the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act would change that, and it would allow young people to live in LIHDC funded housing and pursue their education full time. Also, the Connecting Youth to Jobs Act would be $40 billion for youth employment programs, and there's an emphasis on getting young people connected to living wage employment, and there is an emphasis on ensuring that this program serves youth who have faced barriers to employment and historically disadvantaged youth. And they actually specifically call out youth experiencing homelessness using the education definition of homelessness, as well as youth with foster care and juvenile justice involvement, immigrant youth, as well as youth of color. Next, we have the Homeless Children and Youth Act. This is an important legislation because I think if you heard, and many of you know who are practitioners on the ground, there's not a uniform definition of homelessness across federal agencies and federal programs, and HUD has the most restrictive definition and eligibility requirements when it comes to who they consider to be homeless and who they consider to be a priority. So the Homeless Children and Youth Act would fix that issue. There would be, a unified definition across federal programs. So if you are considered homeless by the U.S. Department of Education or by different programs at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, you would be eligible to access HUD homelessness assistance programs. The legislation has been introduced. It's bipartisan in the Senate. We are expecting introduction in the House to happen soon, and it will also be bipartisan. And then we continue to know that there's just a need for flexible funding to be available to truly address child, youth, and family homelessness. So we continue to support the need for a new two-generation approach program at the Administration for Children and Families at HHS that has $2 billion that can provide flexible funding to help serve children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. And I think that's it. Next is questions.
Yes, question time. And while we wait for questions to come in, I just want to do a quick or pass it to Darla for a quick ad.
Yes, thank you so much. So we do our annual summit. I think this is our 8th summit in March in Washington, D.C. It's March 2nd and 3rd this year, and it's both virtual or in person. So you have the option. You can go to our website under events and register. We hope to see you there. Schoolhouse Connection does the education track. So we do have different breakout tracks. We have a For Youth by Youth track this year. We have the intersection of policy and practice. We have a race equity track, and then we have an education track by Schoolhouse Connection. So we hope to see you either virtually or in person.
It's going to be great, guys. You should definitely go. I mean, Darla's gonna be there. Why else wouldn't you go?
Yes. Oh, and then this is also mine. Also, we are a membership organization, and we do have a broad network of members of community-based organizations, McKinney-Vento homeless liaison programs, and other state-based and national organizations. So if you are a school district, you can become a member for $200 a year, so pretty affordable. Again, you can sign up to become a member for next year. It's on our website in the top right, the membership button.
Oop, this is an accident, technical difficulties. No worries.
No worries.
I'm sure we've all experienced something like this in the past year and a half.
And I'll take the opportunity to we've got some questions from Michael Santos, at our colleague at Results. Do you think there will be another budget reconciliation next year heading into the midterms and potential gridlock? And if so, how would that change your priorities? I don't know. It's very hard to predict and have a crystal ball about what will happen. I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that we're in unpredictable, chaotic, and very divisive times. I think in terms of the appropriations work, the work around maintaining or getting as close to the ARP level as we can will continue. And I think, the documentation and the advocacy around that will continue. I also think some of the priorities around higher education and amending HUD's definition will continue, because they will be the same. We might find ourselves in a situation where we're building support as opposed to actually expecting it to cross the finish line. So I've used this analogy before, but so much of federal policy advocacy compared to state advocacy is making the case. It's like a dress rehearsal, and you never know when the curtain will go up. So we didn't know, for example, last December, we'd worked for a long, long time on the FAFSA fix, and then there was this opportunity and we'd be ready to go. That was true with ESSA in 2015. So it may be that our priorities are the same, but we're doing the work of educating, we're doing the work of mobilizing, we're doing the work of gaining support, so that when there is hopefully more function and freedom in our U.S. Capitol, we'll have that opportunity. The curtains will go up, the lights will go on, and we'll cross the finish line. So that's my first take. Darla, what's yours?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I definitely think it's been kind of unprecedented how Congress has gotten work done during the pandemic and how they continue to get work done. It's not how, we got bills across the finish line previously. So I definitely feel like we've adjusted. I am in the mindset that RHYTPA is getting done next year, like 100%. Partly because both of my Democratic champions in both chambers are retiring after next year. And so just ensuring they make it a legacy issue, which they've communicated to me, getting it done is a legacy issue. So like Barbara said, just taking advantage when there are moments and opportunities and energy around our policy priorities. And we have like pages and pages of policy priorities beyond what we've shared on these PowerPoint slides. We didn't want you to all fall asleep. So we always have priorities that we're working to get included in bigger packages that are moving.
Another question from Michael. Are there harmful amendments that you saw in Congress considering Build Back Better that you think advocates should lift up in their conversations with their members? And Michael, you can keep the questions going. We have time, so these are all great questions. That's an interesting question. Considering, unfortunately, the poison pill, whatever it is, whether it's related to immigration, whether it's related to critical race theory, whether it's related to, young people being able to play sports if they're LGBT, and those poison pills, those cultural warfare issues crop up, and somewhat predictably, and they're more about rallying a base than they are about kind of legislative change. In terms of substantive harmful amendments, in other words, not part of the larger political divisions that we're seeing, but the substantive ones, I'm not aware of any. I have been concerned about the conversations around childcare and preschool, comments made by the Senate Majority Leader that I think we'll need to be paying close attention to. And I've seen some good rebuttals already. So that was concerning because previously that hadn't been a part of the package that had really been particularly criticized up until yesterday. And to me, that signals that it's really popular. People really want it. So that was the one thing that I just saw that yesterday. And I don't know, Darla, if you have other intel or thoughts about potential amendments that advocates should be wary about, other than sort of the like I said, the cultural ones that are just really troubling.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been lots of troubling amendments but none that have any traction or any chance of actually getting in there.
Other questions? I know we went over a lot quickly. And just to be more positive, because I think it's important to be, or we're talking about children, youth, and families, so we have to be positive. They are our future. To be positive, we can look at some of the gains, not just the ARP, but the higher ed. Sometimes it just takes a long time, and this is a really invisible population. So members of Congress act when they hear from their constituents. And Alian, why don't you share a little bit that you heard yesterday from experts on advocacy? I think that would be a good thing to insert right about now.
Sure. So in terms of advocacy, as Barbara said, hearing from constituents is oftentimes like it's the best way to actually get a member or a senator to take a stance on an issue or to vote for an issue, a certain bill that's related to issues that are pertinent to our work, or to co-sponsor legislation. And as Barbara mentioned, that's also a great way for members to show that their support for a certain thing, such as the Homeless Children and Youth Act, and to actually get it passed. So something that we are doing at Schoolhouse Connection is we love to connect persons in our network, whether it's liaisons or providers or persons who are part of other community-based organizations, connecting you all to your representatives and setting up meetings so that they can hear from you and they can hear what's going on in your district. Another great way to do this is actually meeting in the district, and this is something that we plan to implement a lot more in the coming year in 2022. And I just want to let everyone know that we are going to be doing that. So if you are interested in advocacy, if there are any topics that you heard us mention today that you're particularly interested in, or you feel a particular drive for and you want to play some sort of role, please reach out to me. You'll find my email on the Schoolhouse Connection website. I'll also put it in the chat, but you can reach out to me. We are more than happy to connect you with your representatives and also provide you with whatever support you need to be an advocate. If it's something that you've never done before, or it's something that may even be intimidating to you, or it might be something that you have done before and that you do have experience in, but maybe you need just a little bit of help to connect with the representatives or connect on these specific issues. We are more than happy to help you with that and connect you and just put you in touch with the relevant people, and also just being in touch with us. And we once again, I cannot emphasize how happy we are to provide you with any assistance that you need with this, and any prep or materials that you'd need to do this or participate in this fully or efficiently. Just reach out to me. We are so happy to do that. And like I said, again, it is really and truly one of the most effective ways to get a member to listen, to pay attention, and also have your voice heard, and have the voice of the children, youth, and families that you work with heard, and sharing stories. And in the example of the campaign to get the $800 million cemented, and to have it not be one-time funding, to let them know of the things that you are implementing or that you're thinking of implementing in your communities. And then once everything gets done, maybe bringing them into your school district to show them the fruits of your labor. But yeah, please reach out to me if you're interested, if any of this intrigues you at all, if you want to get involved. I know that you all, if you're here with joining us today, you probably have some interest in policy, but if you want to take it a step further, reach out to us. We are happy to help.
Great, thank you. And we do have two questions. One of them I will start, and the other one I think will be good for Darla to chime in particular. The first one is, in your opinion, what does the crossover on support for homeless at birth through 5 childcare with McKinney-Vento at K-12 look like ideally? Um, ideally, the systems are talking to each other, number one. So ideally, the K-12 system, the McKinney-Vento system, is asking about the younger siblings of school-aged children who are that they have contact with to make those connections to the birth through 5 childcare world. So, we know everything about brain development and how critical those early years are. So ideally, the K-12 system is looking to that system, looking at the younger ages to make those connections, and the birth through 5 is also looking up in the sense of if they see older siblings, they're connecting them and letting those families know about their McKinney-Vento rights. One of the things that we're working on that we're really excited is actually an app, a Head Start app. We're working in collaboration with the National Head Start Association that would allow liaisons to make instant referrals to Head Start programs. And then if it goes right to the Head Start program, they can immediately enroll if they have a spot. If they don't, they can get the child enrolled someplace else. So that's an example of one mechanism. So ideally, there's real integration, because again, we know that the impacts of homelessness actually start prenatally before birth and can really set children up for a hard time learning. So those systems need to be talking to each other. And we think the Build Back Better provisions will be very helpful in that regard. Next question, this is where I'm wondering if the National Alliance has a protocol on how to include homeless youth from the education systems in the point in time count. So there's a number of things to unpack there. I'm going to let Darla go first, actually.
The answer is no. And the National Alliance on Homelessness doesn't want youth who are homeless according to the education system included in point in time count numbers. Their policy agenda is to exclude youth and families who experience hidden homelessness. The Alliance's agenda is to prioritize chronically homeless, visibly homeless, single adults on the streets. Full stop. We've been advocating collectively to change this policy through the Homeless Children and Youth Act, which I had mentioned earlier. It would unify definitions across programs. The other thing it would do is the education data that does include the students who are identified as experiencing homelessness under the education definition of homelessness to be included in the annual report to Congress. That would also go into effect with the Homeless Children and Youth Act. But the National Alliance on Homelessness actually actively advocates and lobbies against the passage of the Homeless Children and Youth Act, which is our biggest barrier to actually getting that bill across the finish line. I don't know if you have anything to add, Barbara.
Just to say that some communities have gone ahead, even though HUD excludes children and youth who are homeless under the education definition. There are some communities and even some state coalitions that have amended their point in time counts with the education numbers to paint a composite picture, so that even if federally it's not counted, that local leaders and state leaders can get a true picture of what homelessness looks like. So we do have examples of liaisons and of state coordinators, for example, who've gotten a section added to their interagency council or their state coalition report on the point in time that talks about the education data. But it's, as Darla said, there are real divisions in the homelessness advocacy world about that, but we think it's absolutely critical. Another question that just came in regarding the FAFSA Simplification Act, how can local college action professionals get involved to support the effort? Will you be offering a webinar in the future that touches on the topic specifically? So thank you very much, Rita, for asking that question. I'm going to put in the chat box two things. One is that we are working with NASFA, which is the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, on a webinar that will be specifically on homeless youth and on these new provisions. And to put that in the chat box right now. It is for NASFA members, that's the thing. So I would share it with your colleges and universities, financial aid administrators. It's great because it's coming from their professional association. so they get the information from their peers. So that's one thing that's there. And then we will definitely be doing more archive, more webinars as we get closer. But I want to put in one archived webinar that we did with our partners, John Burden Advocates for Youth, on the foster care piece that kind of goes into more detail specifically about these provisions, and that could be a good thing to share with professionals now while we ramp up our new, more training specifically on FAFSA simplification. I'm looking for it now. I found it. All right, I think I don't see any more questions coming in. I can do a little promo on the, oh wait, there are more. Yes, I will definitely, we'll share information about the Head Start app. Actually, maybe I'll talk a little bit about, while we wrap up, I'll put it in there. But if I see your name, and I will email you so you have information about that. It might be on our website. I'm not sure yet with respect to the Head Start app. But also, just a few days after the National Summit on Youth Homelessness, back-to-back events, national events, Schoolhouse Connection will be holding a national convening on student homelessness. It's a 2-day intersectional event, really organized around teams. We know that it takes a team to address student homelessness, so we're prioritizing registration for teams that are composed of just 2 people from 2 different agencies. But we will also make the teams on the back end too, so you could also register as an individual. So we're excited about this. This summit is very specifically focused on making progress towards 1 or 3 goals: early childhood, K-12 or higher education, and replicating processes that will lead to those changes. So we've got one day that'll be featuring best practices, and then the second day is action planning, where we'll be having our peer experts help action plan with the teams who are there. So if you're interested in that, commercial advertisement is there.
And just in case you're also interested in staying connected with us generally, once again, feel free to check out our website, nn4youth.org, schoolhouseconnection.org. Sign up for our newsletters as well. That's a great way for you to keep in touch with what's going on with federal policy and also practice and other areas. You'll find all of the great updates. We won't inundate you, but you'll be kept abreast of all the wonderful things that are going on in Congress and in the country in general. You're looking for ideas, resources, etc. I encourage you to sign up for both of our e-newsletters. You can also keep up to date with our federal policy advocacy on our specific advocacy policy pages. And Schoolhouse Connection also has a state policy page, just in case you're wondering what might be going on in your state and how that differs from what's going on at the federal level as well. And of course, there are different issues that are handled at the state. So in case you want to find out more about those as well, especially issues concerning unaccompanied homeless youth, high school graduation, college access, etc., I encourage you to check those out. But thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate you all joining us, and we hope that you learned something. We hope that you learned several things, and you will receive this PowerPoint in your emails soon as well. And we hope to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.